Hey all. I want to speak a bit about Mercury being in Cancer because Mercury will be in Cancer for almost the next 10 weeks. Normally, Mercury moves through any given sign within the span of 2 or 3 weeks, but because Mercury is retrograde at the end of the month until almost the end of July, will fall completely into the water sign of Cancer. We have this very long extended process of Mercury moving through the sign that is most associated with longing and safety and home and roots and mother and children and family, borders and boundaries, for better or worse as well. At the same time, this transit is so much more significant because we also still have the South Node in Virgo, which is ruled by Mercury, just finishing its time there. By early August, it will move into Leo. And at the same time, over the next couple of weeks, we also have Uranus in Gemini, also ruled by Virgo, squaring that nodal axis of the North and South Node in Virgo, the South Node, and the North Node in Pisces. There's quite a few very interesting things that happen along the way, which I will most likely get into also later on as the weeks and months progress. But I first want to give a bit of an overview because this transit is so significant. Normally we don't pay too much attention to Mercury, save for its retrogrades maybe. But this time here, Mercury again proves its function as that psychopomp, that guardian of souls, the dweller on the, not the dweller on the threshold, that's Saturn, but the one who is actually able to pass between thresholds, this very liminal quality, the mercurial shifting energies of Mercury. In traditional astrology, Mercury was also often seen as being neither male nor female, depending on whether it rises as a morning or as an evening star, right? Before or after sunrise or sunset. So Mercury brings us from one threshold into another. And over the next 10 weeks, into early August, Mercury will definitely facilitate this journey, but it will bring such a big focus on the Cancer archetype here. Before we get into it, if you feel like liking and subscribing to help me fight the algorithm a bit, that'd be so much appreciated. And maybe also commenting what is really moving for you in this time and where and how you might already feel this impulse and this energetic of Mercury being in Cancer since a couple of days. So Mercury entered Cancer June 1st, like 2-3 days ago, and will stay here until August 9th. The retrograde will be exact from June 29th, so almost the very end of the month, until July 23rd. And it'll span 25-26 degrees of Cancer back to 16 degrees of Cancer. That's first thing interesting to see is Mercury goes retrograde on the point where next week we have that famous Jupiter-Venus conjunction, which will happen next week, Tuesday, Wednesday, June 9th. Venus and Jupiter are coming together in the night sky right now so beautifully. You can see them always after sunset. And with every passing day, since weeks and weeks and weeks, they've been moving closer and closer together. Venus is kind of catching up to Jupiter. And they are often called the lights also, because save the sun and the moon, there is no other point in the sky that is as bright as neither Venus nor Jupiter. So it's a very beautiful thing that we also get to see this, because it doesn't happen every year when they get together that we can see them, because sometimes they're so close to the sun that you can't see it either at morning or at night. Mercury going retrograde end of the month, almost exactly at where this conjunction between these two benefics happens, right? Venus is often said to be the benefic of night, if you want to go with traditional Hellenistic astrology, and Jupiter the benefic of the day. So these two luminous light beings that usually also we associate, at least with our human ego perspective, with all the beautiful things, the things that bring us joy or pleasure or fulfillment, coming together in Cancer, already talks about when and how this new cycle, a conjunction between two planets, is always like a moon cycle, right? Like the metaphor of a moon cycle where the sun and the moon come together again. So a conjunction is always both the end of one cycle, but also the beginning of a new one. And with the beginning of the new one, it's also always about seeding potentials, seeding desires, seeding wishes, seeding action plans or whatever that we might have in order to move forward into our future and get them fulfilled. At the same time, the conjunction in Cancer also talks about where and how our deepest longings and yearnings with the Cancer archetype, which usually revolve around emotional closeness, emotional intimacy, roots, belonging, having a safe place to live, right? A place where we feel home, harmony with lovers and friends, but especially family, or creating and attracting lovers or friends that feel like family, right? This is core fundamental needs. And that's a very important word to understand with the Cancer archetype, needs. With Venus and Jupiter, we can talk about desires. Venus and Jupiter are our visions or our bigger dreams. But with Cancer, it's about the most primal needs of the human psyche, which are getting so often bypassed right now, right, in our current day and age. Our most primal needs can't be bypassed. They can't be disconnected and dissociated. I mean, you can try to do that, but you'll suffer in the process. You'll wreak havoc on your own life. And our most essential needs are nothing that is fanciful or that we just wish or desire, this big dream that I have that maybe someday gets fulfilled, right? No, that is not what Cancer is talking about. Cancer is talking about, what do I need in order to feel safe? What do I need in order to feel heard and understood or held, right? So much of this Cancer archetype, when you also think about the glyph of these two claws interlocking, but also creating that safe space in between. Yeah, there's the hard outer shell, and that's the boundary in my home country, and the expression of Cancer also as patriotism. So we probably see a lot of this kind of stuff in one way or another, even more in the news than we already see now. When and how do I feel safe in my own country, and whatever the immigrants, or there's a war there and we need to expand our country here, and or we need to take over Greenland. This happens in all kinds of countries, not just in the US, not just in Western Europe, anywhere. But where and how we might feel that there's outsider forces coming in, this will be maybe not as quite beautiful expression of this strong Mercury in Cancer time. But on the positive side, the claws holding a space, creating a safe space for ourselves, for the inner child, but also for the actual child and children and babies, right? The womb is that first protective space, but then the family unit, ideally, is this next protective layer where we can feel safe and soft and vulnerable, right? And have a kind of barrier to the hard outer reality. So Mercury going retrograde on that point also talks about where and how whatever is being seeded or is getting to a point of fulfillment now within the next week or two with Jupiter and Venus conjunction will have much deeper layers that we need to maybe work through or move through during the retrograde. Mercury's retrograde are always about where and how we need to redefine, reconfigure, retell ourselves the stories of our own lives, rewire our nervous system, rethink how we perceive reality, right? That Gemini kind of function, the duality. Mercury being retrograde in Cancer promises to be a very emotional process, one where maybe our mind and our intellect and our words are not as clear, is not as straightforward, are not as analytical, where it's more about the intuitive feeling. How do I feel like I'm being heard, right? How do I feel like I'm being understood? But where and how do I maybe also communicate overly emotionally in a way that makes it hard for the other person to really hear what I'm saying, because the emotional charge of my unmet needs comes on stronger than the actual words I might be saying. That'll be a huge dynamic during the retrograde, more so in July. But we all feel this building already. Whenever Mercury is in Cancer, the mind becomes a bit more associative, a bit more poetic, more sensitive, but also feeling maybe a bit more cloudy or drifting, right? Cancer is the spirals, Cancer is the vortex, Cancer is the waves. It's very different to this more young energy of straightforward, whatever, Gemini or also Sagittarius, which we just had the full moon in. It's the most yin sign of the most yin signs, right? It's this primal yin water of the mother, also of where and how we feel connected to the greater mother. How much we feel like we actually belong here on planet Earth, or feel like there's no home here, there's no family here, I'm not safe here, right? A lot of these kinds of stories that need to be worked through over the next 2 months. But again, maybe not in a very linear fashion. You might feel like you're giving something out, but it only comes back in a really roundabout, weird way. There's, of course, also the kind of trickster quality of Mercury that also will be embodied there. But at the same time, also the spiral nature of Cancer, right? Cancer crabs on the beach, they very often walk sideways. And yeah, they can be very slow when they're feeling safe. But then when they sense danger, when they see whatever human being approaching, they can be back into their hole in an instant. They can be so fast. And that is also where and how our instinctual protective mechanisms can come out so strong and so fast and overtake us, because the charge of the emotional body is just stronger than whatever our rational mind maybe thinks or tells us about ourselves, right? No, I work through that, right? But then that amazing Ram Dass quote, if you think you're so enlightened, try spending a week with your family. That's very, very Cancer, right? And it will show us very quickly where and how our emotional defenses can come on that quickly. So another thing to consider is this Uranus in Gemini, and that it also squares the South Node in Virgo. Like I said, the South Node in Virgo is almost done with its 1.5-year cycle there, while Mercury will still be in Cancer by late July. The South Node will already move into Leo, so there's also Mercury guiding and holding and crossing that threshold. With the South Node, we of course always have to see when, how we need to let go of certain dynamics, certain patterns, certain behaviorisms, certain karmic tendencies, if you want to call it that don't serve us any longer in regards to the archetype where the South Node is in right now. The South Node being in Virgo, it's ruled by Mercury, and it shows us also we need to let go of a lot of where and how criticism, perfectionism, right? Trying to please and trying to serve and trying to be good, and how much we have internalized that in our own body, in our own nervous system, in our own emotional body, in order to feel like we matter, or in order to feel like we can't even be safe or loved or seen in the first place. That's heavy territory. It comes easy out of my mouth, but oh my God, it's very heavy territory, especially for people that have strong Virgo maybe as well. And Mercury here being in Cancer at the same time also shows us, including its retrograde there, that whatever we need to let go of in the Virgo territory, where and how we hold ourselves prisoner because of our mental structures that have one set idea of how reality, of how we ought to be, and we need to behave in a certain way in order to be practical or useful, right? Or be of service. But there is, of course, also the shadow side of both Virgo and the Pisces archetype, of self-sacrifice and martyrdom, and of victimizing ourselves through that. So since the South Node is approaching now the end of Virgo, the process, and Mercury being in Cancer, where we also really don't have this like conscious grasp on our mind and mental structures so much anymore. To me, what it feels like, at least right now, and what it will feel like will be a big sentence over the next 2 months as well, is that the processes we've been sitting with for 1.5 years almost now already, that maybe already worked through a lot of levels of our mind, of our conscious identity, and are really reaching culmination. There's the last shedding, there's the last letting go, there's the last release that needs to happen. Mercury in Cancer shows us where and how much our upbringing, our societal conditioning, our relationship to our parents, whatever they may have been. If our parents were not there, that's also one form of relationship or one kind of imprint, have actually laid the groundwork for kind of patterns that are not serving us any longer, and where the feeling, the emotional body needs to process, not the mind. It's easy to understand with the mind. Go to therapy 2-3 times, talk through it, and you understand, oh yeah, I'm doing this because of my dad there, and because of my ancestral karma there, and blah, blah, blah. But to actually then shift the emotional pattern, the emotional response in your own body, in your own nervous system, to behave differently, that's the hard work. And there's, of course, the deep wisdom that shows us in order to heal it, you got to feel it, right? We can't bypass this just with the mind and our rational understanding or analyzing. No, these kinds of processes need to be felt and they need to be moved through. And also these parts of ourselves, whatever they might be, however they might hold us prisoner or keep us small or keep us in some kind of like unconscious or semi-conscious victim mentality, or I need to be good and I always need to be in point, and holding it together, right? Not allowing this deeper flow that actually with both Cancer and the Pisces archetype really want to come in, are keeping us prisoner. And Mercury and Cancer also showing where and how we need to hold, when how we need to see and really feel and hold space with unconditional love, with compassion, with empathy, with patience. These parts of ourselves that maybe felt neglected, that maybe felt judged harshly, that maybe felt like we're not good enough. And yeah, sure, we got this maybe from our family systems or whatever, but when how we're still carrying that in our own body, we also can't bypass these. They also need and want to be seen through the lens of the Cancer archetype. Compassion, empathy, softness, patience, holding them, not needing to fix anything, not needing to transcend or heal and let go of whatever it might be, but just honoring them and seeing like, oh, you also served me. And what did these parts of ourselves most likely do? They most likely protected us, right? There's again that Cancer archetype of protection, a boundary to the harsh world, to keep that inner soft, squishy part of ourselves safe, however old it might be. And it might even be pre-verbal, right? Because with Cancer, we're also really talking about things that happened before our conscious mind was even active. So before the ages of like 2 or 3. So working through these patterns, there's often not even any words for it. There is not necessarily an analytical understanding that you can get to, or rationalization that you can work with. But it can be just these very deep primal emotional waters, emotion, right, energy in motion, that just move through and that just want to be held and seen. Uranus in Gemini, squaring that nodal axis. I think the square is exact like June 14th or something. Let me check actually really quick. It's by like June 13th, 14th, which is interestingly also when Mercury enters its shadow period, right? By June 12th, June 13th, Mercury enters 16 degrees of Cancer. So this is the retrograde territory where ultimately in late July he'll come back to. So you can also see what begins now in the middle of June that will only close the big loop that both Cancer and Mercury are pulling here by the end of July. And probably only by the end of July or early August, you'll slowly get the rational mental understanding and answers to the much deeper emotional waters that we will all be pulled through over the next 2 months. Uranus in Gemini, squaring that nodal axis, also being ruled by Mercury, applying all of the same archetypal dynamics, applying all of the same kind of emotional processes that need to happen here. But Uranus in Gemini says, wake up, liberate, free yourself. That old story, that old version, that old self-sacrificing martyrdom or whatever you might be still pulling, or that like I've got it all together kind of, which can be a very strong Virgo energy. Virgo can be a bit anal there. And I'm really using that in a psychological sense, right? There's different parts of our very early upbringing, the different phases, and when how complexes appear in that period, they can kind of get stuck in our own psyche and body and stay with us for a long time. And one part of Virgo is definitely the anal phase. And that is also then the controlling, the micromanagement, the holding it all together. No, I can do this, I've got this, I can do this by myself, right? But you can clearly see probably both in yourself or in people you know how this kind of attitude is coming also from a deeper pound of woundedness, of emotional lack of safety, of emotional lack of containment. So Uranus in Gemini now squaring that south node and squaring the north node in Pisces, of course, inviting us, you need to surrender, you need to come to places of forgiveness and this ultimate, again, compassion. The two archetypes that speak the most about unconditional love and compassion are both Cancer and Pisces, and they're both really, really activated here. And the North Node in Pisces shows us this is the path to go. This is the ultimate surrender into the unknowing, into the uncertainty, your mind is not clear right now, everything moves in spirals, whatever you try to do or set out to achieve is just not like landing in a straight way right now over the next 2 months. You got to surrender. You got to throw your hands up in the air at some point and say like, okay, inshallah, whatever will be, will be. And they're also giving up these more controlling attitudes that might still plague us, or where we think we're in control of life, right? Uranus, of course, wants to turn everything upside down, especially in Gemini. It will be very mentally activating, but it also talks about where and how we really need to see things from a completely different perspective. Where and how you told yourself the story of your life, the story of your childhood, the story of your family, and where and how that story is just not liberating you anymore, but it's enclosing and maybe calcifying you, right? And that is the other side of that Cancer archetype. The shell can become a prison. The shell in the actual crab at some point gets too small and the crab has to get out. And it's not like the snake metaphor, oh, shedding the skin and then there's the shiny new skin directly. No, Cancer crabs move out of their shell and there is no new hard shell. The shell needs to form over a couple of days or even weeks. In Cancer crabs, this process is called molting, M-O-L-T-I-N-G, molting. And it also shows we need to retreat to a really safe spot in order to even go through that process of molting. So there will probably be a lot of really deep pulling back within all of us over the next 2 months, because we're going through some form or another of molting, of needing to shed old skins, because the old shell that maybe protected us in the past has now just become a calcified prison and is keeping us too tight and like we're not getting enough new life force and new air. Uranus in Gemini then corresponding to where and how that radical shift of perspective and really learning to see things much more fluidly and differently and upside down and topsy-turvy is actually liberating. That can be very shocking, it can be confusing, it can be disturbing because it upsets the apple cart of how things were and always were. But that upsetting the apple cart has to happen, and if we really want to move forward into a new future without the old skeletons in the closet, without the old shells that just keep us too small, right? And that North Node in Pisces is of course also ruled by Jupiter. Jupiter is still moving through Cancer for the next month, and curiously Jupiter will go into Leo basically right on that day, a day after Mercury goes retrograde on June 29th. And then also a couple of days later, by July 3rd, we have that really explosive Mars-Uranus conjunction in early Gemini. And that's just, wow. That's, wow. It'll be a lot of lightning strikes and a lot of intensity there. So that's just a little bit of an overview. There's so much more interesting tiny tidbits of when Mercury goes direct again also in late July, what will happen then, because then there's Jupiter in Leo by that point, opposition to Pluto, really activating the intensity of this year that up until now has not really come online, but we'll still have Mercury in Cancer. There will still be this emotional waters that our mind has to move through, and where we're still in some form or another of an emotional inward process, this inner yin journey towards the center of ourselves, towards the center of our heart, towards the place within us, but also in the world that really makes us feel safe and sane, where our emotional essential needs need to be seen and validated. And also, Mercury, last part, of course, communicated, right? We can hold on so much of where and how our hurt emotional body is just also like trying to encapsulate itself in order to prevent further harm. All the water signs speak about one way or another of preventing further emotional damage or further emotional wounds. But with Cancer, it's so much about not communicating, right? Because we can also have such a deep, intuitive feeling for what other people need or the emotions of other people, especially if you've got anything strong in Cancer, any strong Cancer placements, right? People with this kind of Cancer placement usually struggle the most with that, because they can clearly see, oh, this person has this need and this person is going through this emotion, very often even before the person recognizes themselves or is willing to admit that to themselves, right? But then that can create this loop of where and how, if I see all of this, why can't nobody see how I'm feeling or what I need right now or what would feel good for me, right? But this is this lesson that Cancer really needs to learn to come out of its crab shell and communicate. So Mercury over the next 2 months in Cancer, one core essential lesson here will also be, are you truly clearly communicating your emotional needs? Are you clearly even communicating them to yourself? Are you seeing and validating them yourself? Or are you still trying to bypass them or push them and squish them away, right? In mythology of Cancer, the Cancer crab was sent to prevent Hercules from attacking the Hydra, from Hera, from Hera or Juno, the great mother goddess, the partner of Zeus, right? And all Hercules did was just squash the crab down. He just stamped on it. And there we can, of course, also see how already 2,500 years ago, this more patriarchal, linear kind of mindset and thinking was slowly overtaking the collective consciousness of this planet. All is as it should be. That was what was needed back then. But now we really got to recognize when, how the suppression of the feminine, the suppression of our emotional bodies, the suppression of the child and of this sensitive emotional energy that we all carry within is just not going to cut it any longer. This is just not how we thrive. It's not how we heal. It's not how we form actual families and communities, right? So yeah, please don't do that. Don't try to stamp down and squish down the emotional body of yourself, but then also learn to communicate that not just to yourself and validating and seeing that within yourself, but then also communicating your needs, your emotional wounds, your emotional patterns to the people that really matter, because we're not an island. We're not like truly independent beings. We're living in a web of infinite interbeingness and interconnectedness. We are all family on some essential level. And as long as we can't recognize that and can't thus also communicate ourselves and think we are independent, I need to fulfill all of my needs by myself, I call bullshit, sorry. That's just not what we are as human beings. The air I'm breathing, I'm sharing with every living being in my proximity, right? There is no boundary ultimately. There is no independentness, like I'm an isolated island and I need to fulfill my own needs. So please also don't fall into that trap and help other people to recognize the same insight. And yeah, if you like this, again, it'd be so appreciated if you like and subscribe, comment your own experience and perspectives on this. And as always, I'm also available for one-on-one sessions if you want to dive in much deeper and see where and how these next 2 months are really playing into the depth of your own chart, of your emotional process. Because yeah, it's a very significant Mercury time the next 2 months ahead. So thank you so much for listening, and I'll see you soon.